So this is chapter 8. In this chapter, we'll be talking about social stratification. We're going to define what is social differentiation. From there, we're going to talk about social mobility. We'll talk about two different types of social mobility, both upward and downward mobility. We're going to discuss two different types of social stratification systems. One is a caste system, the other one is a social class system. We'll delve into poverty in the U.S., and then we're going to be finishing up talking about different types of societies. So social differentiation is just simply how people are different in society. If you take a look at this picture here, this is a Norman Rockwell painting. And sometimes Norman Rockwell actually paints himself in the photo or in the painting, and you can actually see him there with his hand upon his chin. And the name of this painting is called the Golden Rule. And the Golden Rule says that you treat people what? The way you want to be treated. And so, as you can see, he's got all different types of people painted in this picture or in this painting. People of different races, nationalities, different religions. So treat people the way you want to be treated, despite their differences. So sociology as a discipline does study how people are different in society based on their race, their ethnicity, their socioeconomic status, their religion, their class. But it's not just how they're different based on these categories, but also how are they treated differently? What rights and opportunities do they have? Do they have to struggle for certain rights and opportunities? So social differentiation is just how people are different in society. And like I said, sociology will study how these people are different, but also their lives because of those differences. Social mobility. So social mobility is defined as the ability to move up or down in society. For your social status to be elevated, for your incomes to be elevated, or for your social status and your power and your incomes to go down. And throughout the course of our lives, a lot of times we do experience both upward and downward mobility based on our life types of situations. So upward mobility is the ability to kind of move up in society. Here in the United States, we live in a capitalistic type of society, a lot of education, and so we have a lot of different opportunities to achieve upward mobility, to move up from one social class to the next. A lot of people do it through higher education. Sometimes people work up the corporate ladder. Other people may marry up. It means they marry somebody who comes from money or has some influence. But just simply the fact of just marrying somebody else who's educated, who brings in a second income, can also elevate you as well. It can bring you from, say, the working class up to the middle class just by simply having those two incomes. Starting a business, job promotions. But sometimes people have hardships in their lives and they may lose status. They may lose opportunities. Their income could go down. They may have some sort of hardship. Sometimes this occurs through divorce. People go through a divorce. Now you go from two incomes to now one income. It could be due to job loss, incarceration. There could be some sort of terminal illness in the family that causes a lot of medical debt, various types of accidents, incarcerations. So this is called downward social mobility. And throughout the course of our lives, we may find that there may be times that we are on the upswing and doing really well financially. And then life has a way of hitting us sideways really hard, and we may kind of be down on our luck for a while. We may have to sell our home. We're going through a divorce. We may be jobless for a while. We may be homeless temporarily. But as time goes by, if we're able to kind of pull ourselves back up, we can achieve upward social mobility again. So a lot of times we're kind of riding this wave up and down throughout the course of our lives, depending upon our circumstances. Social stratification. So when we think of strata, I want you to think of layers. Social strata, social layers. And that's kind of indicated through this pyramid that you see here. There's different layers. So social stratification is the hierarchical ranking of people according to their wealth, power, and prestige. It's where do you rank in the pecking order? Where do you rank in these layers based on your wealth, your power, and prestige? And the main thing that causes these different layers is inequality, where some people have more resources, more money, more status than other people. That's what actually causes these layers. So the more status, the more power, the more leverage, the more money, the more opportunities you have, that's going to put you higher at the pyramid, at the very top. And as your status and your income and your leverage and your opportunity goes down, you're going to go lower and lower and lower on that pyramid through these different layers. So keep that in mind, whether we're talking about social class or gender or ethnicity or age, wherever you are on that hierarchical, if you're at the top, that usually means that you have the most power and the most leverage. And in a moment, we're going to talk about two different types of social stratification systems. We're going to talk about a social class system and also a caste system. So the first one is called a caste system. So again, you still have these different layers. The people with the most power and opportunities are going to be at the top, and it will go down. So a caste system is a fixed class structure determined by birth, which means that the layer that you were born into, whether it's the bottom layer, where you may be born into poverty or possibly even slavery, all the way up to the highest level where you may be a monarchy, you may be a king, you may be a business owner at the very, very top. The layer that you're born into is usually the layer that you live through throughout the rest of your life, and it can determine a lot of your kind of life that you have. So in a caste system, the caste that you're born into is usually one that you're going to live through and die through. It can determine the people you're allowed to associate with, depending upon which layer you're in, the type of jobs and careers you're able to have, who you are allowed to marry, the way that you're buried, and the way that you're taken care of in old age. India has a caste system. Now, they kind of moved away from their caste system in the 1940s, but it's still very much culturally ingrained. So depending upon which actual caste you're born into, like I said, it can determine a lot of your life, which means that there's little to no social mobility. There's not a lot of moving up and down. But what's interesting about a caste system is that usually their religion is tied into their caste system. So for example, India, the predominant religion in India, does anybody know what it is? The predominant religion in India, does anybody know what it is? Hinduism, that's right. So Hinduism, they believe it's a polytheistic religion. They have many, many gods in different elements of the caste system, but they also believe in a rebirth known as reincarnation. So within a caste system, depending upon the family that you're born into, if you have an elevated family unit, then you're going to be at the top. So within Hinduism, since they believe in reincarnation, their perspective is that if you live a good life, a holy life, and you're good to people, that through the process of being reborn again through rebirth, that you can actually be born into a higher caste system. So morality is tied into their caste system. Their religion is tied into it. But they also believe that if you're not a good person, if you don't do good by people, that you can be, through the process of rebirth, reincarnation, you could be born into a lower caste system where you're not going to have as many opportunities and not have as a good life. So it's interesting how they will tie in their particular religious beliefs into, if you are a really good person, that's how you can achieve upward mobility. But at the end of the day, their main belief is that if you live such a good life, that you can actually break through this process of being born again, living, suffering, and dying. You can break through to a spirit world. Some people call it utopia. Christians would call the spirit world what? Heaven. That's right. So that'd be the ultimate goal, is to kind of break through to do such a good job and to live such a good life that you kind of break through utopia. But for the most part, the caste they're born into is going to determine a lot of aspects of their lives. Now, here in the United States, we have what's called a social class system. So again, you've still got those layers, those social stratus. So these are going to be people with similar income ranges, lifestyles, and life chances or opportunities. So your life chances, your opportunities in life. So there's a lot of social mobility within a social class system, unlike in a caste system. So it's considered an open system, not so much a closed system. So the main layers we have here in the U.S. are the upper class, the middle class, the working class, and the lower class. So where a caste system, your family name and your morality would be tied into which caste you're born into. When it comes to a social class system, it depends on how much money you make. It's tied into your income. If you are a wealthy family, you'll be part of the upper class, on down to a middle class family. And as your income goes down, your status and your opportunities tend to go down as well. So the upper class is going to have the most opportunities. The lower class is going to have the least amount of opportunities. And this is where you see a lot of upward and downward mobility, the moving of up and down. So let's take a look, and we're going to kind of break it down to each of the social classes. The first one we have is called the upper class. This is going to be where you have wealthy American families, affluent American families. Even though they are the most powerful economically and politically, they are the smallest social class. They're going to have the most life chances or opportunities compared to other social classes. So what are these life chances? These life chances are the best education money can buy, the best insurance money can buy, the highest quality food, the best connections. The lifestyle, when it comes to the upper class, the majority of people that are part of the upper class are going to be business owners, entrepreneurs. But you have other people that may be celebrities, influencers, lottery winners, but the vast majority, they are business owners. They may own multiple homes, which is going to be an advantage that the upper class will have compared to the classes below them. When it comes to education, most likely they are not going to be going to public schools or public colleges or public universities. They're going to be going to exclusive private schools. It could be parochial schools that are religious based. It could be prep schools. It could be boarding schools. So one of the advantages here is not only getting a very high-end education. The other advantage of going to these private schools and private colleges are the connections that they make, because they're rubbing shoulders with other wealthy family members. And so if they are in with other wealthy families and those people own businesses, then they can open up doors and opportunities to them that they wouldn't have. So going to these very expensive Ivy League schools isn't just about getting a Class A education. It's also about who do you connect with, who do you network with to open up doors and opportunities for each other. They're going to have the best medical care that money can buy. They'll have Cadillac plans in regards to their insurance premiums. A lot of these business owners will actually run their health insurance as an expense through the company, where they are actually not paying for it themselves. Where most of us who work for other people, the company we work for may pay part of our insurance premiums each month, and we have to pay for the other part. When it comes to being a business owner, a lot of them are able to run these expenses through the company where it doesn't hit their pocket themselves. Their life insurance, their health insurance, their cell phones, their internet, the vehicles that they drive, if they are able to justify that this is tied into the business, they can often run it through as an expense. And the more you can run expenses through your company, the lower profits that you make at the end of the year, and the only thing you pay taxes on as a business owner is going to be the profits. So if you're actually able to show that you didn't make any profits because your expenses are so high, even though you're benefiting from those expenses, you're benefiting from having a vehicle and gas and insurance, you're able to benefit. If you're able to run it as an expense, sometimes you may not pay any taxes at all because you're not showing any type of profit. My brother's a business owner. He's been a business owner in Louisiana. And so there's a lot of things that he has an advantage of running through the company as an expense that is totally legal and justified, where most people, they have to pay for it out of pocket. So let's talk about the difference between old money and new money. Now, both situations, these people have a lot of money. Old money is going to be generational. That means that somebody at some point within the family made good decisions, they started a business, and they started to become wealthy. And they started to pass down this wealth and the family businesses to the next generations. So some examples of that would be Ford, Sam Walton with Walmart, Johnson & Johnson, the Hiltons, even Trump and his family. This is considered old money. It's generational money that's passed down from one generation to the next. New money, the majority of millionaires today are first generation millionaires. This is considered new money. So somehow they've created the money themselves, like whether they started a business or they're influencers or they married somebody rich or they're a celebrity. This is new money. So if you had to guess between old money and new money, even lottery winners would fall under new money. If you had to guess between old money and new money, which one do you think is more likely to hold on to their money, to grow it, and to pass it down? Old money or new money? What's that?
New money. Oh no, probably the old money because they've been doing it.
That's right. That's right. That's right. So you said it just right. Old money is more likely to hold on to their money because sometimes whenever people come into a whole lot of money, they may have a tendency to do what? Spend it, blow it, or they may not know how to manage it very well. So yeah, if you come from old money, this is a different perspective of money. The idea is this is generational. We have been managing it. We've been growing it. We've been passing it down. So a lot of young people that are born into these families, they are groomed from a very young age to understand how to not only have money, but also how to grow money and how to invest money. That's right. That's why a lot of times we'll see lottery winners and celebrities. They'll become multimillionaires, but they don't manage it well, and they end up losing it all. So the middle class. This is the largest social class. It's where most people would identify as being. And there's really three categories through the middle class. You got the lower middle class, you got the middle class, you got the upper middle class. So the spectrum within, the reason it's so large, because you could be making $30,000 a year up to six figures. So the spectrum is actually pretty wide. It is the largest, but it is shrinking. People are experiencing what's known as the middle class squeeze. But they're being squeezed in two different directions. Some people are experiencing divorce, layoff, job loss, and so they're going from the middle class down to the working class or into poverty. Divorce is going to be a big factor there. But like I mentioned, we have more millionaires today than we ever have before. So some of this squeeze is upward mobility, where people are actually being squeezed up into the upper class. So it's not necessarily a negative. They're kind of being squeezed both ways. The majority of college-educated individuals are going to be part of the middle class. They refer to them as white-collar professionals, people who need some sort of technical degree, some sort of certification, some sort of college degree. They're referred to as white-collar professionals. They usually get paid a salary. They're usually not getting paid per hour, except if you're talking about nurses. Nurses do get paid per hour. Most people that are part of the middle class are homeowners. They usually have some sort of mortgage. When it comes to education, it can be kind of hit and miss. It really depends on how much money that you're making. You have a lot of people that are part of the middle class that their kids go to public schools, they go to public colleges, junior colleges, public universities like UCA. But you have other people that are part of the middle class that are high income earners that are making six figures where they can afford to send their kids. They have that supplemental, that extra income to send their kids to private parochial schools like Sacred Heart or St. Joe's. They may be able to afford to send their kids to Hendrix College, which can be very expensive as well, or Subiaco. That's a boarding school that can be very, very expensive. So when it comes to the middle class, it really depends on how much money you're making. A lot of people are getting a good education in public school, but you have a lot of them that are moving in and they're getting an education in private schools as well. They may have to take out college loans, but depending upon where you are, even among a middle class family, if you're on the lower end of middle class, you may qualify for Pell Grants, which would allow their kids to go to colleges or even public universities. The majority of middle class families are going to have medical insurance through their employer. So that's going to be kind of a different situation than the working class. The working class is probably one of the most vulnerable social classes. So again, this is going to be the third layer. So if you remember, social stratification was these different layers. So at the top layer, we got the upper class, the middle. Now this is the third layer called the working class. So money and income is going down. Social status is going down as well. Life chances and opportunities are also starting to diminish as well as we go through these layers. This is a growing social class. A big factor in this is the squeeze of the middle class kind of falling into the working class due to divorce or job loss. More blue collar workers, people who work in the service industry, construction, not saying they can't make good money. Most people that are part of the working class are not making a whole lot of money unless you are working your way up within that blue collar job and being a business owner yourself, or like a manager or a foreman, you can make really good money. So they do tend to be more vulnerable to layoffs and also downward mobility if they are working for a factory or assembly line. If that assembly line actually shuts down and they start to outsource those goods from overseas to bring them in, so they can be kind of vulnerable to some of these layoffs. A lot of people that were working in the service industry got laid off during COVID-19, that were bartenders, waitresses, whenever they started to kind of shut everything down. So if you're part of the service industry where you can't work from home and you have to kind of really be in the public eye, a lot of people got laid off, part of the working class during COVID-19. So like I said, a lot of blue collar jobs, construction, the service industry. A lot of people that are part of the working class, most of them are renters. They may be striving to becoming homeowners or get a mortgage, but you have a lot of renters in this category here. When it comes to working class families, when it comes to their education, they're almost exclusively going to be going to public schools, public colleges, public universities. There's usually not a lot of extra income to be able to afford to go to a private parochial school or to private colleges or universities. A lot of them are going to qualify for Pell Grants, which is a good thing. And if you remember, whose administration started Pell Grants? We talked about that earlier today. No, not Pell Grants.
Wasn't that the next one down?
It was the next one. It was the extension of the New Deal. It was called the War on Poverty, where Medicare and Medicaid and Pell Grants came out of.
Housing, right?
Huh?
Wasn't HUD then too?
Yeah. That would be Lyndon B. Johnson. Yeah. So that'll be on exam 3. That's right. So Lyndon B. Johnson.
Roosevelt's vice president?
No, that was decades later. Lyndon B. Johnson was the vice president of Kennedy. John F. Kennedy was assassinated in '63, and then Johnson was put in his place. Yeah, he was sworn in after Kennedy was assassinated.
If he won another term after that, right?
I'm not 100% sure. I know that he was heavily involved in the Civil Rights Act and the Civil Rights Movement. I'm not sure if he won a second term. That's a good historical question. I'm not sure. Some people that are part of the working class, if they're working for a good solid company, they may have health insurance through their company. Some of them may not have health insurance at all if they're working for a company that may not provide it. And since health insurance is so expensive, they may decide to forego and have no insurance at all. So we have tens of millions of Americans that are working class that have no insurance at all because they're in this vulnerable position where they can't afford private insurance out of pocket, or the company they work for doesn't offer it, but they're not poor enough for Medicaid. They're making just a little bit too much. They're in that very vulnerable spot. They're not rich enough, but they're not poor enough. So as you can see, as we go through these layers, the struggle becomes more real. Now we're going to the last layer. This is going to be the lower class. A lot of struggling with poverty and very few life chances and opportunities. This is a very difficult place to be living. When it comes to the lifestyle, a lot of minimum wage jobs, or they may be unemployed, they may be disabled, they may be elderly where they just can't work. There may be mental health issues, schizophrenia, various types of trauma like PTSD, especially if they were veterans. So there's a lot of reasons why they would be struggling financially. Some of them are homeless, or they may be living in subsidized housing, which is known as like Section 8 housing. And because of the housing that they're living in, or the areas that they're living in, because they're poor, there is also a higher risk of them becoming victims of crimes because of the areas that they're living in. The sketchy areas, the crime tends to be higher, the drug use, the prostitution, the homelessness, so they're more likely to be victims of crimes. The vast majority are going to be qualifying for Medicaid, health insurance for the poor. They'll qualify for WIC, which stands for Women with Infant Children, and this is going to be that food voucher system, where if you do qualify for Medicaid and you have children under the age of 5, you can use these vouchers and take them to various places and get formula and get different types of food. It can be a pretty big benefit. SNAP or food stamps, a lot of them are going to be qualifying for that as well. So I guess the good thing about being an American citizen compared to living in a third world country is that if you are poor here, there are safety nets like Medicaid, WIC, food stamps, Section 8 housing, Pell Grants. So, I mean, it's good that we at least have that. You go to most places around the world, whenever we look at their level of poverty and starvation, they don't have a lot of those safety nets that we have here. I'm not trying to downplay poverty in the US, but if you compare it globally around the world, we're doing much better than a lot of those other places. Some of them may be attending some poor public schools, but then again, I don't want to stereotype. There's poor people they tend to be zoned and they go to really good public schools, but they are more likely, because where they're living geographically, more and more rural areas that aren't higher income areas, that aren't bringing in high tax revenue, that they do have a higher likelihood of being zoned to kind of poorer schools that aren't doing as well. Pell Grants do allow upward mobility. If you are of the lower class, there's a really good chance that you're going to be able to get Pell Grants to go to college, which is a good thing. Other social problems, there's going to be higher rates of teen pregnancy among this social class, which is unfortunate because all that does is just perpetuate the cycle of poverty over again, because higher teen pregnancy rates. Overall, teen pregnancy rates in the country are going down, and they've been going right down for decades. But if you break it down into the different classes, those of the lower class have higher teen pregnancy rates, which is a problem. They also have higher divorce rates, which also perpetuates the issue of poverty as well. So a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, a lot of social problems with the lower class. So that kind of leads us into poverty. So poverty is having insufficient funds to meet your basic needs of life. Not enough money to take care of your basic needs: food, water, shelter, clothing, medical care. Feminization of poverty. This states that statistically, women are more likely to experience poverty compared to men. This is true in the US. This is also true globally. It's more true globally around the world in patriarchal societies where women have very few rights and opportunities. They're less educated. They're less likely to work. A lot of women in the United States are educated and they are working, so they are less likely to experience this feminization of poverty. Those that are most vulnerable to living in poverty are going to be uneducated, single, stay-at-home mothers that their husband or significant other may have passed away or there's a divorce. They tend to be the most vulnerable. The working poor, these are people that are working, but their incomes are still below the poverty line. And then we also have what's called extreme poverty. And this is whenever the income of the individual or the family is half of the poverty line. So for example, let's say you have a family of 4. You have mom, dad, a couple kids. So for the 2023 federal poverty line, it's at $27,750. So if you are the working poor and your income is below the poverty line, that means that your gross income or the total income that you earn is below $27,750, and you probably qualify for different types of benefits. But if you are living in extreme poverty for a family of 4, you're making somewhere between $13,000 and $14,000, a very, very low income. It would be difficult enough to take care of a family of 4 off a gross income of $27,750 because taxes haven't even touched it yet. That's gross income. That's not your net. So extreme poverty is really tough. Okay, so let's take a look at different types of society. So in the beginning of the lecture, we talked about social differentiation, how people are different in society. We talked about social stratification and how the main factor of where you are on the pecking order has to do with inequality, people having different amounts of funds compared to other people. So what we're going to do is we're going to start from the very smallest society and we're going to grow larger and larger where it becomes more and more wealthier and dynamic. So the smallest societies we have that are still around today are called hunter-gatherer tribes or hunter-gatherer societies. These are the earliest human societies. They've been around for about 250,000 years. They tend to be nomadic, where people are moving for resources. They move with the weather, they move with other animals, they hunt small game, they hunt large game, they're constantly moving. Whatever resources they get, they consume it, and then each day they're doing the same thing over and over again. There's a lot of gender equality, which is referred to as egalitarianism, because nobody really has any type of resources over anybody else. Whatever resources they get, they're consuming it on a daily basis, and they're doing the same thing over and over again. So these tribes, because of this, since they're really struggling over resources, they tend to be some of the smallest, only about 50 or 60 people within this tribe. The division of labor, basically they're hunting and gathering. They're hunting small game, large game, they're foraging for fruits, nuts, vegetables, those types of things. So whatever resources they have, they're pretty much consuming it on a daily basis. The next type of society is going to be larger, it's going to be more complex, more dynamic. These are called simple horticultural societies. They've been around for about 10,000 years, and they're still around today. Very primitive, very simple, but they're also stationary, which means that they're staying in one place. The nomads are going to be moving around, so they're not going to be growing crops. The simple horticultural societies, they are going to be growing crops, so they're staying in one place. So they're still hunting for food, but they're also growing crops. And so since they're able to grow more food, that means that their population can become larger. They have more people, they have different jobs, it becomes more diverse. They're stationary using primitive digging sticks, which you can see in this photograph here. You have some Native American tribes that use this. It's a primitive digging stick that is used to kind of break up the ground in order to plant seeds to grow crops. The surplus of food allows for more leisure time. Since there is more of an abundance of food, that means that there's a division of labor. You have people in different types of jobs. You have some people that are in construction, religious leaders, political leaders. Since there's more food, there's more leisure time, so it becomes more dynamic. Another thing that occurs is as we're going through each of these societies, I want you to keep in mind that social stratification is widening because there's more inequality. As there's more of a difference between those who have resources who don't, as these societies get larger and more complex and wealthier, the social stratification is going to widen between the haves and the have-nots, okay? So keep that in mind. Now we're going to go to a more complex one. These are called advanced horticultural societies or complex horticultural societies. So they're going to be more advanced than, say, the simple ones. An example would be the Andean people in South America. So the reason it's more complex is that beyond using primitive digging sticks, they use other forms of manipulation in order to increase their crop productivity. They have a deeper understanding of terracing or manipulating the land, and you can see that here in this photograph here, where they're actually cutting into the land to kind of manipulate where the water would grow and also to plant crops. So they have a deeper understanding of manipulating the land, how to move water for irrigation, and also even simple things like using fertilization or manure in order to cultivate more crops. So this allows the population to grow and become more dynamic. So with this particular tribe here, they grow corn, also known as maize, hot peppers, potatoes. Another thing that the complex horticultural society will use is they will use livestock in order to kind of help carry the cargo that they have. So they're integrating not only growing crops, but they're also integrating livestock as well. And that moves us into the agrarian type of society. So this is even larger, much more complex. The agrarian society comes before an industrialized nation. So they haven't got to the point where they're using manufacturing and assembly lines and machinery. So this began about 5,000 years ago. The population within an agrarian society is somewhere in the millions. So before the United States became an industrialized nation, we were an agrarian one, all right? So before we ever got to the cotton gin and all that, we were an agrarian society. We were stationary, we grew crops, but we also, we raised livestock as well. So it's kind of a combination between horticulture and also agriculture. So the means of production is agriculture, raising crops, and also livestock. The animal-drawn plows, they brought an abundance of crops, allowing the population to grow. So it wasn't just growing crops, it was allowing these animal-drawn plows to actually break up the land. Also during this time, you also did have some very wealthy families, and they were referred to as landlords or lords of the land. And what they would do is they would allow poorer families to come onto their land to grow crops, and these were referred to as cash crops. And the reason they were called cash crops is because they made a lot of money. They weren't very perishable, so they lasted a long time. And so the landlords would allow these poor American families to come to their land. They would provide them the land, the housing, the supplies that they need. But in exchange for that, they would take half of their crops and they would go off and they would sell it at the market, making them wealthier, having more money, and they would buy more land. So it kind of grew capitalism. So economic inequality and the conflict over resources really started to rise at this point, and this is where you had certain American families really become very, very wealthy. And that kind of moves us into the industrialized society. So now we're moving into the Industrial Revolution, starting in the 1700s. Machines and factories started to replace animal-drawn plows. Electricity started to replace animal power. And this is where the United States became really a global power at this point. So technology and medical advances brought about a longer life expectancy, higher standard of living, an overabundance of food, where people years ago in the U.S. of the colonial time was struggling to get food. We now have an overabundance of food. We have urbanization, the creation of cities, globalization, where we have multiple economic markets working together and trading with each other, the creation of nuclear weapons, which we've never had before. Another negative aspect of all of this productivity is also having global pollution and also global warming. And a lot of this has to do with the pollution that's being caused by us burning fossil fuels in order to keep these factories running pretty much 24/7. And that leads us lastly into where we are today. We have now moved into a post-industrial America where we are moving away from manufacturing and we're moving more towards more of a service and more of a service type of industry and the computer industry. So this is economic activity will move from assembly lines to more human innovation, computer technology, cybersecurity, and also artificial intelligence. And this is where we're starting to move from, instead of buying physical products, which we still do, the selling of what's known as intangible assets, things that you really can't hold, but you're still purchasing it. So for example, intellectual property, computer software, the buying and selling of personal information, virtual services, apps, these types of things. So where we are today, there's going to be a growing demand in education to train people to meet the needs of this. And that's why we're seeing such a huge demand in people going to college for cybersecurity and all of these computer types of industries, because this is where the demand is. So it also is going to increase the issue of cyber attacks, grid warfare, where a lot of the battles that we would be fighting would be boots on the ground. Now it's going to be more of a situation where if a particular rival enemy can hack into our grid line to disable us, to kind of make it to where we can't communicate with each other, a lot of the warfare is going to be kind of moving in that direction. So I know we